Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Pep Talk, the Persuasive Evangelism podcast from Solas. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Simon Wenham, your co-host, and I'm joined yet again by Kristi Mayer. How are you, Kristi?
I'm doing very well, Simon. It's great to be here today. How are you getting on?
Very well, thank you. I must say that I did notice that whenever Andy introduced you, that he always used the superlative, and I was going to continue this tradition actually, but you know, when you don't know someone quite so well, so I didn't feel it would be quite right. So I do apologise for not using the same.
I no apologies necessary. The lack of the superlative, I very much appreciate, depending on the superlative. So thank you.
Well, exactly. And I'm also delighted to introduce our guest today, who is Lydia Houghton, and she is a successful YouTuber. She had Andy Bannister on her show not too long ago. She's also a print journalist, and she's also a ministry trainee as well. So she has many different hats. So welcome to the show, Lydia. How are you doing today?
I'm really good, thank you. I'm very excited to be here, so thank you for having me.
Brilliant. It's fantastic to have you with us. Now, I wondered if you could just start by just saying a little bit about your own background, how you got involved in evangelism, actually, and perhaps say whereabouts you are in the country as well. That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm based in Cheshire, and you either do or you don't know where that is. So I tend to say it's near Manchester because most people know where Manchester is. Yeah, I mean, how did I get involved in evangelism? I mean, the short answer is I became a Christian and just had this overflow of wanting to share the gospel, really.
That's wonderful. I mean, one of the things that you've mentioned before is just the impact of seeing somebody your age baptized. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what happened there?
Oh, that's such a great question. It's such a privilege to talk about this because I get to remember this experience and it always makes me quite emotional. But yeah, so I was raised in a Christian household, going to church. I definitely prayed to God, but I very much saw the worldly way of living and thought that was very attractive and that was where the meaning of life lay. And so when I was around 16, I just decided to go for that, thinking that was the meaning of life, basically. And spoiler alert, it's not. Those things are empty and they will lead to, well, the wages of sin is death, ultimately. But yeah, one big thing for me growing up was there wasn't a lot of young people in my church. And a lot of the young people that I knew were living this kind of worldly lifestyle, to put it in Christian jargon sense. And then I went to university and yeah, I heard this girl's testimony. I won't mention her name, but I've recently reached out to her and just said, you know, praise God for the impact this had in my life. But she was getting baptized and there was a VT of her at the front of this church I went to. And I just thought, oh, you can be a young person and be a Christian. And now I'm 24, having been a Christian 5 years. Of course, I know that's true, but I just didn't know people my age who were living for Jesus. And hearing that girl share her testimony, seeing her testify that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, had a huge impact on me.
Brilliant. Thank you. Actually, one thing that struck me watching your videos is they're really engaging, but they're a slightly different way of communicating from my generation, which made me feel slightly old. But I thought they were excellent. But it was interesting. I was thinking actually how important it is to have people of your generation being able to speak to your generation and in an engaging way. And one way you do that is obviously through videos. We featured David Lochhead in a previous episode, and he does streams videos. I wondered, why do you think videos are a particularly good way, or vlogging a particularly good way of sharing your faith?
Oh, I'll be honest, Simon, I didn't necessarily choose. Well, of course I chose, but I kind of just stumbled into this area of things. So I studied broadcast journalism for my undergraduate degree and basically learned how to edit videos, learned how to storytell through videos, and just thought, it wasn't just thought, it was obviously a long process, an incredible process to kind of experience, but you know, why not share my faith through this means as well. So that's basically how I got into doing my YouTube channel. I actually started off on TikTok doing short form videos, but then transitioned into long form videos. Started my YouTube channel in 2021, and yeah, it's been steadily growing since then.
That's so wonderful, Lydia, like to have that gift to be able to manage these different platforms and to be able to engage so creatively and persuasively as well. I mean, if somebody's thinking, oh yeah, I'd like to give that a go. I mean, not that any of us would be anywhere near as gifted and good at this as you are, but were there any particular pitfalls that you came across that one should try and avoid when on these different platforms?
Ooh, I mean, one pitfall, I suppose, just in a heart sense, is looking at the numbers and just focusing on the numbers. So one thing that I've come back to throughout this journey is, you know, a video might have 300 views, but that's 300 people. And I think looking at all these YouTubers that have hundreds of thousands of views, you can think, oh, that's what a quote unquote successful YouTube channel is. But if you actually think that each view is a whole person, a whole life who can then go and impact other people in their lives, it puts things into perspective. So yeah, a pitfall that you can easily slip into is just looking at the numbers as opposed to actually thinking that those are real people viewing your content.
Brilliant, thank you. And another thing is your shows are very creative and you're obviously engaging with your audience. Exactly what you've just said is sort of not seeing people as numbers, but actually people. I wondered if you could give any advice for how you engage with real people when you're obviously in a virtual world. And perhaps we could use some of that advice here at Solas and see what you say. So
I think, honestly, one of the things is just being real and not putting on a persona online. I'm very open on my YouTube channel, sharing about the struggles of life as well. I don't just want, social media can have a tendency to be a highlight reel. I don't want that on my YouTube channel. So yeah, I try to just be real and honest. And when you're talking about Jesus, it's kind of hard not to, because Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Like he's truth, isn't he? So there's going to be that element of just being real if you're talking about him. But yeah, I suppose in a personality sense, just making sure I'm not putting on a persona on my YouTube channel, that I'm just being myself.
Mm. It's so refreshing, Lydia, to hear you talking about what it means to just be real, because I imagine that talking about Jesus and sharing your faith on these very public platforms can be quite exposing. But also, as you're kind of sharing your faith, I think you've reflected in the past that there was a particular point when you realized you didn't really understand the significance of the gospel. And you mentioned something about expositional preaching and reading being important in deepening your faith. I mean, could you share a little bit more about that? Like how has that impacted you and shaped and strengthened you as you've talked about Jesus?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Kristi. Thank you. Yeah, so I became a Christian in 2020, and the way I'd describe it is it was a very basic understanding of what Jesus did for me. I was a Christian, but it was 2022, and I remember I'd gone on a trip, and it was Holy Week, so it was Good Friday, and I sat down to make a video describing the gospel, explaining the gospel, and I found it really difficult. And I sat there and I thought, this is really, honestly, a bit disturbing. Like, why can I not summarize the gospel? I suppose we're talking about evangelism, aren't we? The way to describe it is, why can I not summarize the gospel in a way that I could convey it to someone else? I was in a church that, as the time I was there, as far as I can remember, did not have expositional preaching, and they definitely emphasized truths about God's character. But in terms of, a passage being expositionally preached and then getting to the gospel in every sermon, that just wasn't my experience. So yeah, that summer, I just made sure that I knew how to explain the gospel in its depth evangelistically, I suppose. And yeah, I just remember realizing how important it is that as Christians we can explain why we believe what we believe and actually what we believe to other people, rather than, truths that are amazing, but God has a perfect plan. Like, it's true, but it's not the gospel in the way that we need to evangelistically explain it to other people. And the church I'm in now, brilliant expositional preaching, and just the growth I've witnessed in myself, if I can say that, since I've been in this church, is amazing. And that's what happens when you're hearing the gospel and when God is giving you the eyes to see his truth.
Great, thank you. And so are you saying that was just simply hearing sort of more gospel-centered preaching? And is that why you just, in a sense, you had all these different themes, but perhaps not the sermons weren't homing in on the central message? Is that what you mean? And then that affected actually how you could even communicate about what you believed? Is that?
Absolutely. I think there wasn't as big of an emphasis on why we need the gospel, if that makes sense. So our sinfulness. And I was reading in my devotional this morning, that's an important, obviously an important part of coming to Christ is knowing why we need him as perfect saviour. And I just didn't quite understand that fully about myself. I mean, I was a Christian, so there's a lot of, I don't really know how to explain it, but I do just remember this moment, and I realized that what I'd been talking about on TikTok didn't have as much depth as potentially it could have. So yeah.
Hi there, it's Gavin from Solus here. Just very briefly interrupting today's podcast to remind you that Solus's book, Have You Ever Wondered, is now available. It's an ideal gift to give to people who aren't Christians, but people who are thinking through the big issues of life. Beauty, justice, identity, love, stories, nature, hope, things which intrigue us, move us, and prompt us to ask big questions, but ultimately point towards the Christian faith. It's a pre-evangelistic book, and it's proving to be really helpful in developing good conversations with people in our world today about Jesus. If you'd like to find out more, come over to the Solus website, solas-cpc.org, where you can find out more, or look online in your usual bookseller or on the high street. And now, back to the programme.
I think, one of the things that happens a lot on social media is often people tend to focus on books, and presenting different evangelistic books, or just talking about particular books in general that might specifically assist somebody. Are there a couple of books that you might recommend on evangelism that you've found to be particularly formative? Or would you say actually, no, books are great, but actually perhaps interviews, videos, podcasts might be where it's at? What would you recommend for somebody, who's thinking about Jesus?
That's such a great question. There's two things I'd say, and for everyone listening, I promise this isn't set up, but the best book on evangelism I've read is How to Talk About Jesus Without Looking Like an Idiot by Andy. It really, really is. I've read a couple, but he emphasizes the importance of questions and addressing assumptions behind terms that people use. And I do remember I read that book last year, just going into work the next day, and I was on shift with a Muslim girl. It was when I was working as a student ambassador, completing my master's degree, and just being so eager to implement what I'd read in that book, which kind of leads me on to the second thing I thought of, which is actually just having conversations. So I was talking to my pastor about this, but one thing that's come up in my walk is having those conversations and not being afraid to enter into those conversations, particularly with atheists, people of different faiths, is you might not know the answer to a question, and that's actually okay, because that can be an opportunity for you to actually deepen in your faith, because Christianity is true. So it's going to hold up to those questions. So that's been something that's really aided my evangelism. It's been when I've been asked a question that I don't know the answer to, and I've gone away to research it, and my faith has strengthened. And the friend who's asked the question, there's nothing wrong with saying, oh, I actually don't know the answer, and they might respect it more if you go away, come back, and then share what you've learned.
Fantastic, thank you, and thank you for the endorsement. And you will be very happy to hear that. But that's the whole point, isn't it? Is to help people practically to communicate about their faith. So thank you. And one thing you also do quite a lot of is you engage with secular culture as well. You talk about the Hunger Games books, Taylor Swift's music, for example.
Yeah.
Do you think it's good to connect with culture in that way? And do you have any advice on that? Because that can be sort of, because sometimes Christians feel they sort of can be divorced from some areas of culture, but equally, if we're not communicating about those kind of things, then we can sort of, people can just miss us as Christians. So I wondered if you had any suggestions in that area.
Yeah, great question. I think this is one way that the Lord has used my past experience for good, because I very much was in those secular spaces. I would go out clubbing a lot. And that's been one thing where, if I now say to someone, I won't go out. I don't go out at all anymore clubbing, but, because I have church on a Sunday morning, and they might say to me, well, how do you know that that's better than this worldly lifestyle? And I'd say, well, because I've done it. And Jesus is so much more satisfying than any of that. But yeah, to kind of go back to your question a little bit, I just think it's something I've definitely failed at many times, but we can think that as Christians, we just shouldn't at all engage with secular culture. But I actually think it can be an incredible witness. I think it's hard, particularly I do a lot of book reviews of secular fiction. I think it can be very hard, but I think, I was reading this morning, The Woman at the Well. Jesus starts that conversation off by talking about water. So that's not a spiritual conversation straight away, but with engaging with secular culture, you're almost meeting non-Christians where they're at, and you can get to Jesus from there. So I think it's actually important, but it's something that is hard, but I do think it is really important.
And it's interesting, Lydia, that you say you want to meet people where they're at, and then just thinking about your vlogs, for example, in light of that desire, particularly the move in your blogs towards kind of documenting parts of your life, just your daily life. Like, why? I guess if you're sharing your faith, why do you also have these vlogs about your life? Like, what are you hoping to do there, and why even bother with them?
Yeah, great question. Well, when I first started my YouTube channel, I was very much like, right, every video has to be explicitly about Jesus, in the sense of, I don't know, sharing my thoughts on a particular Christian matter or whatever. But then I remember I did a vlog, which was a day in my life as a Christian student, which was just showing me going to Christian Union and things. And the feedback I had on that video was immensely positive, and I had a lot of comments saying things like, oh, it's so nice to just see a Christian doing normal everyday things or living out their faith. I had comments like that. And I think, they can be a great witness just to show non-Christians, we are human as well. We have this incredible hope to live for, but this is how that hope empowers us to live in our day-to-day lives. This is certain choices we make. And I think in the vlogs, I can show that, it might be a Saturday night and I don't know, at a Bible study or something, as opposed to going clubbing. I think it comes through in the vlogs, but it's not like you're providing a platform for non-Christians to maybe watch the video, because it might not even have a, I don't know, Christian title. I've done vlogs a day in my life as a master's student, but then they're clicking on the vlog and they're actually hearing Christian truths in that vlog, as opposed to a video with an explicitly Christian title that they might just never click on. So I think it can be quite evangelistic.
Are there certain ones that have been particularly popular? I was just interested, as you say, you've done quite a few different ones, some with explicitly Christian subjects and others that are just a day in the life. What has been particularly, is there ones that have had a particularly good response from your listeners?
Yeah. Funnily enough, my vlogs of Christian conventions have done the best, which, they might have a Christian quote unquote title, but for the non-Christian community, I've had feedback about, non-Christians might not even know that these huge gatherings of Christians take place. So it gives them an opportunity to kind of witness this side of things that they might not even know existed. Other than that, my student vlogs have been quite popular, that I think just especially for people going to university, it's good for them to see a little bit of what the university experience can be like. And I had a lovely comment from a girl the other day saying that they got involved in Christian Union purely because they'd seen it in my vlogs. And that's just a prime example of why we do what we do. It's evangelistic, but also hopefully helping Christians.
And just a final question for you, Lydia, before we wrap up, and it's quite a big final question, but in terms of people getting to see your life and the things that you are doing on a daily basis, and also just things that you struggle with, you've been very open in talking about mental health in relation to anxiety that you experience, and you've been very open about that. How have you found doing that? Because again, as we mentioned earlier, it's very exposing to talk about something that's so close and so intimate and so personal to you. And has that helped you in what ways has that helped you in your sharing of your faith, if it has at all? Like, why have you chosen to talk about it?
That's a lovely question. Thank you for asking. I think I know what an isolating experience it can potentially be. Battling with mental health struggles. And one thing that I thought for many years was that other Christians don't struggle with anxiety, depression, and coming into spaces where I found out that Christians do, it helped me so much. I read a book by Paul Grimmond, Matt Searles' content, and just hearing these Christian speakers who talk about it openly, I thought they've helped me so much just by saying that it's something that Christians can experience. I would love to be that person for someone else, and just to let other Christians know, you know, you might battle with this, but your identity is in the fact that you're a child of God, and we can seek to glorify God in our response to things. And I think ultimately with my YouTube channel, you know, I am here to know God, to make God known. And ultimately it doesn't matter if I feel a bit of embarrassment or whatever, which I ironically don't talking about anxiety, because I'm kind of used to talking about it at this point. But it doesn't matter, because long term, you know, my life is about him, and I fail every day, of course, but that's my chief purpose. So everything else pales into insignificance when, you know, you're just living with that view, imperfectly, but yeah, that's what I seek to do.
Lydia, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to get a glimpse into what God is up to in your life and the ways in which you're serving others so remarkably. Thank you so much for your time. And this brings us, sadly, to the end of another wonderful conversation. Please join us again next time in a couple of weeks, when we will be joined by somebody else in the hot seat. But until then, this is me, Kristi, and
goodbye.
Goodbye to you too, Lydia.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Goodbye, everyone.